Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. I wanted to start today by saying a huge thank you to all of my listeners, especially you guys who tune in every week, those of you who support the show by following me on social media, and always a special thanks to all of those who support me through donations and my Patreon. There are some big changes coming to the podcast soon that include changes to the Patreon tiers, sponsorship, monthly memoir giveaways, and lots of more interviews. Today's episode focuses on enthusiastic sobriety programs and the abuse that these so-called drug rehabilitation programs inflict on their participants. Part of the troubled teen industry, Jacqueline tells her story of being involved in a handful of these programs and the way they negatively impacted her life. Her story also includes her fight for justice and the activism taking place to create legal changes to the broken system that allows this institutionalised abuse to continue. If you are a Patreon, you can find a link to an unlisted YouTube video of this particular interview, which is waiting for you now, as well as the ad-free audio version. Now here is Jacqueline. So hello, Jacqueline, and welcome to the show. Today we have finally, after all this time, managed to get together, and we're going to be chatting about something that I think is really important because it's still ongoing today, and it's something that you have a very active part in exposing to the world. I think it has some connections to the troubled teen industry that this podcast has looked into previously. So I'm sure some of the listeners will draw parallels between this particular program and some of the things we've discussed before.
Yes.
But would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure. So my name is Jacqueline Liebler. I am currently living in Memphis, Tennessee with my husband and 3 dogs and 2 kittens. I'm originally from Atlanta. I grew up there. When I started working for the program that we're discussing today, I actually moved to Phoenix, Arizona for 8 years working for them. And then when I resigned, I moved back to Atlanta. And then my husband and I moved here in 2017 for his job. So I don't know what else to say about myself.
Well, we spoke briefly about the fact that you're currently training to become a forensic psychologist, which I think is really interesting.
It's so cool. So especially it's something I've always been interested in. You know, when I was working for the program that we're going to talk about today, I wasn't really educated or credentialed in any way to be considered a counselor, even though I was. And there were parts of that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed working with people. I enjoyed when it seemed like people's lives got better. And I mean, now looking back, I'm, definitely seeing it differently, but there were things that I really liked. And that's always a field I'd kind of wanted to go into, but I just never had the time or the money and just kind of, did whatever I could to pay the bills. And recently, and during the pandemic, actually, especially with everything going on in the world right now, I think it's really important. People with mental health issues in our criminal justice system are treated horribly. And it's a very misunderstood demographic. And because I am so intimately involved with, people like that and have been for years, and I have mental health issues myself, I really wanted to get involved and be able to just make a difference in, my little part of the world. So my degree is actually going to be in criminal justice and forensic psychology. So I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. That sounds really exciting, especially if it's something that you feel so passionately about. So perhaps at the end of this, when we come full circle with our discussion, we can look at some positives that have come from the situation that you became involved in. So let's start by talking about the name of the program that you were a part of.
Okay, so the name of the program, I was actually a part of 2.5 programs. So the one I went to myself was called Atlanta Insight. It's now called the Insight Program because the owner has opened up facilities in North Carolina and Florida. So he considers them all Insight, but it's no longer just in Atlanta, which it was when I joined. And I worked there from 1997 until 2002. I actually, we had a program open up in Augusta, Georgia. That's about 200, no, I don't know mileage. I'm really bad with mileage. It took 2.5 hours to get there. And I know it's southeast of Atlanta. That's all I got. And so I worked there for a little bit. And then in 2002, I moved to Arizona to work at Step 2 Recovery Center, which is like their semi-residential treatment program.
Right.
And they are associated with the Pathway program, which is it's like a sister program of the Insight program. And so I kind of worked, in conjunction with the Pathway program, because we sent the kids who were in Step 2, we sent them to Pathway for their actual treatment. They just lived at Step 2. And I worked there till 2009. And then that's when I resigned.
Okay. That's interesting. So the Insight and Step 2 Recovery were they owned by the same person, or were they run by separate people?
Yeah, it's so incestuous. So there are actually kind of four main, hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there are four main drug abuse programs, and I'm using air quotes here because that's a stretch to call them that. And there's one in Atlanta that also branches out to North Carolina and Tennessee, owned by the same person. There's one in St. Louis, owned by two people. There's one in Denver that's owned by one guy. And then there's one in Arizona that's actually has a branch in Sacramento as well. And that's owned by one person. And then there's Step 2 in Atlanta and Phoenix, and they are owned by another couple. So, but they're all a part of the same organization. Like they're not tied together necessarily like a business, but they all fall under the umbrella of enthusiastic sobriety. Right. So they all practice that philosophy. They've all known each other for decades. They've shuffled each other around a few times and all worked in, different cities, but they're all connected, I guess is my point. They just have different names in different places, and they are all independently owned. Yes.
Right. Okay. So that's definitely the first parallel to draw between these programs and the troubled teen industry that we've spoken about on the show before, in terms of staff members working across different programs that have either attended programs themselves or go from sort of one program in one part of America over to another. Or even those who opened up their own programs and were all originally tied to Synanon in some way. So it sounds like there's, straight away things that sound familiar in previous things that we've spoken about.
I would consider these programs part of the troubled teen industry. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they would fall under that.
Absolutely. Yeah. From what I've read, I mean, I think the thing that sets these programs apart specifically is the air quotes, the work around drug and alcohol abuse specifically, as opposed to general issues that young people might be facing when these programs advanced with things like depression and anxiety and kleptomania or whatever.
Well, they see it all as symptoms of drug addiction and alcoholism. They use the disease model. So anything any mental illnesses, anxiety, depression. Sorry, I have this. Eating disorders, yes, kleptomania, sleeping disorders, anything like that, they consider a symptom of your disease.
Right.
And that if you take care of your disease, then all of those things will go away, which we know is not true. That's not how it works. But that's their take. So they will say they treat all of those issues, but then once you get into it, it's, well, if you prayed harder or you were working the steps correctly, you wouldn't be depressed. So what's going on, so that's kind of how they work with those things. So
right. Okay.
That's where the air quotes come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at Atlanta Insight specifically to start with, what can you tell us about this group in particular, the roots of the group, the history of it, who it was run by, the average day for somebody attending a program within that group?
So all of these groups were shoot-offs of a program that started in the 70s by Bob Meehan. And he, there's a lot of background and history I could give you, but the problem is we're finding out that we don't think a lot of it is true. In our investigations, he claimed to have been in a penitentiary and have killed people and all this stuff. And we're not finding any record of any of that. I did hear at some point he told someone that he got a presidential pardon, and we're finding no proof of that anywhere. So the story goes that Bob he had just gotten out of the penitentiary and he was digging ditches at Rice University in Houston. And he was going to AA meetings at this church, and he was very outspoken and, rebellious. And the priest at that church kind of took a liking to him because, of his personality. And long story short, basically turned him loose on the teenagers that were coming to the church. And from that sprung what they considered a drug abuse program. So
right.
Father Charlie, the priest that was working with him, kind of gave him the title of youth counselor. And so that was the first, iteration of these programs. And that was in 1971. So we're 50 years later, still trying to expose and stop these people. But and I definitely would direct anybody who wants more history to the Atavist article that just came out. It's called Love Bomb. There's a lot of good history in there about kind of how all this started and how he met his wife, who was also, she was kind of the puppet master, of everything. And he basically got run out of Houston because things got real crazy and there was some shady money stuff going on. You're right. He was taking kind of kickbacks for referring people to programs, like to the tune of like $50,000 a month at some point, I think is what I read. I could be wrong about that, but he went on that 60 Minutes episode, and Dan Rather just kind of took him to task, and the board where he was working said, "You're out." And so what he basically has done is just moved around the country, opening other programs just like this. So Atlanta Insight actually came about in 1989 because there was a group of people in St. Louis, which was also an early offshoot of PDAP, which is Palmer Drug Abuse Program, which is, what Bob and Father Charlie started. And they had, some people, I guess, having meetings in their basements in Atlanta, and they sent some counselors down there in 1989. There's some stories about, Clint Stonebreaker, who kind of became Bob's golden boy. And apparently Bob kind of sent him out there to take the program away from the guy who was running it. And there was, it's a little crazy, but Clint ended up buying, some would say stealing, Atlanta Insight from the guy who was running it. And Clint has owned it since then. So that was like early 90s. And when I joined in 1996, Clint was no longer working there physically. He had also started running the program in Phoenix at that time. So he and Bob and Joy, and then Clint ended up marrying Bob Meehan's daughter, which is interesting.
And goes back to that word incestuous that
incestuous,
you
used yeah. So, you know, they started calling themselves, and they had a couple of other couples who were like kind of with them. They kind of brought with them over the years, and they started calling themselves the family. And so they were all in Phoenix. So when I, you know, was referred to the program in 96, there was this guy, Mike, who was running it. And, you know, I mean, that's how it started. Now the program has changed directors, 4 or 5 times since I was there, since I started. And eventually Clint just said, all right, I'm moving back and taking back over this program because things were not going well. And so he and the whole family moved back, I think in 2004-ish.
Right.
They moved back to Georgia, and they've been there ever since. So, you know, and all the other programs are staffed with Meehan loyalists, you know, people that, you know, are owned by and staffed with, you know, Meehan loyalists and people that have been with him since, you know, the 80s, 90s, that, you know, are just kind of lifers. So,
and just to go back to something that you mentioned briefly before, even though Meehan's been called out on some of the inner workings of the programs, any backlash, there seems to just kind of be like a rebrand of the program, like a rename of the program, and maybe somebody else is put in charge, so it looks like he's not directly involved. Is that kind of something you would think is happening with these programs?
I think a lot of things about that. Yes, he would rebrand. Eventually he just kind of put Clint out in front because Clint's very charismatic.
Right.
He's very intelligent. He's good at kind of bringing people in and making them feel comfortable, and you know, talking about, you know, recovery and drug addiction and treatment and all of that. And he sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and he does. He knows what to say, you know. So that's one thing I think would happen. But yes, in the beginning, Bob would just move to another state and start over.
Right.
You know, and part of the problem is there's no national database for like, hey, this guy's trouble. Don't let him open up a program in your state. So that's one of the things that, you know, beyond getting these programs shut down, our nonprofit, one of our long-term goals is to start working, you know, hopefully get some legislation passed and try to get some oversight with these programs, especially as they're working with minors. You know, these are children that, and their parents are convinced that, you know, this is the best place for them, the safest place for them. And they're just getting abused, you know, and it's just, it's just not okay. So I do think there needs to be some national oversight and a national database for things like this. And you know, then there's just good old capitalism, you know, where it's like, you know, he's paying, once he did start actually getting licensed facilities, because that was part of the problem he had in the 80s, is he had these facilities running with no licensing, and you know, parents who were upset would call the licensing boards, and they would come out and investigate and shut him down. And again, you know, you kind of run into that, like, you have to pay a lot of money to get a program like that licensed, you know? So there's, you know, I think there's a lot of kind of systemic issues that cause men like him to be able to get away with what they've gotten away with for 50 years. But yes, that's the other thing, is Bob was really good at just rebranding and reopening somewhere else, and, you know, pulling people into his web.
Yeah. And I think something else that must be difficult in America specifically, where so many of these programs just kind of spring up and all take inspiration from one another, is that state laws are not universal across the whole country.
Yeah.
So where one law or one piece of legislation might be brought in one state, that is not necessarily reflected in the state next door.
Yeah.
So it's not like in England here, when people started wanting legislation around trying to send minors to conversion therapy. Once a piece of legislation is passed, that then goes across the whole country and sometimes across the whole of the UK, which is not something that necessarily, I think, translates to America. So there has to be some common ground on this legislation being passed across the whole country, and I don't know how you do that in a place like America. It needs to be
federal legislation. I mean, that's how. Like, we're going to have to lobby Congress and hopefully get in front of them and tell our stories and explain why it's so important that we have some kind of federal oversight and a database and, you know, ways to make sure that parents don't get sucked into programs like this. You know, I mean, you're talking about, I mean, imagine if it was your child, you know, and you had heard from their school that they found pot or, you know, cocaine in their locker. I mean, you're in a place of like, unless you have dealt with it yourself or you have training or education in that field, you're like floating, you know, like, I don't know what to do here. And so you go to people that you consider to be experts and you trust them. And that's the problem too, is, you know, all of these programs, because of what happened to Bob in the 80s, have gotten really good at keeping what they need for state licensure for the facilities and what they need for certification and licensing for the individual counselors. They're really good at making sure all of that looks good, because that's what I used to do. I was administrative. And so I was a part of that. And the way that it's told to us is like, we do this so that we can continue doing what we do unfettered, because what we do is better than all these places that actually have educated, you know, people working with kids, because, you know, we're coming out of love and we understand teenagers like no one else does. And we are all, you know, former addicts ourselves. And so the way that it's put to us, that because I'm so like, I don't like breaking the rules. I think that there are rules in place in some situations for a good reason. And especially with these kind of laws and rules, like, they're in place for a really good reason, you know? So I was definitely complicit in those kind of things. However, to what I believed in, what was coming from my employers, was this is how we have to do it in order to save people's lives. I mean, that's the way it was put to me. So that's another thing that kind of happens, is it's hard to hit them with their, at the state level with their licensing, or with the individual certifications of the counselors, because they keep everything really above board there on paper. And because the requirements across states are so different. In Arizona, in order to have to be considered a licensed substance abuse counselor, you have to have a master's degree. In Georgia, you have to have a GED or a high school education. Okay. So I mean, that's the gap that happens there. So yeah, I you know, to answer your question, sorry, I kind of go off on these tangents, but yeah, it's difficult to get into areas that you would think would get them in trouble almost, you know, and it's been done, you know, my facility was investigated by the state licensure in 2005, the last time that the media got a hold of this, and I passed with flying colors. Right. Okay. Interesting. I mean, there's so much to unpack in everything that you just said. And I think one of the things that's important to touch on is what you mentioned about parents that might find some substance or another in their child's possession, and immediately
seek some type of professional guidance. And in that article that you mentioned before, Mihan was earning a very handsome salary, not just from the programs that he was running, but commissions from therapists and counselors that were referring patients or children to these programs. So you've got these parents who feel completely out of their depth, who then go to these professionals, and the professionals are then saying, oh, we've got this fantastic program that we can refer your child to. And of course, as a parent, you're going to take that professional's word and their advice and say, this is amazing. You've just come to me with the answer. And then these children are being sent to these programs where abuse is institutionalized, abuse is just rife, and that's definitely something that I think we'll get into before our time runs out. But
that was the point I was making. I'm sorry, I went off on a total tangent.
No, it's
the point I was making was that they have these certifications, they have all these letters after their names. But in Georgia, you can have all these letters after your names and never have had any college or any education in psychology, childhood development, nothing, addiction, nothing. So I mean, I'm not going to say all of them, but at least when I worked there, and I would say a majority of them have no college education. But they've been able to pass these certification tests and exams to get their whatever it is in Georgia. And parents see that and they're like, oh, these people are certified. And it's like, sure, but they're not educated, you know?
So not only have the parents listened to the advice of the therapist or counselor who's referred their child to these programs in the first place, once the children arrive at the programs themselves, there are people running these programs that have no kind of qualification or education to be delivering the type of work that they are promising the parents is being delivered, which is problematic in itself, isn't it? I mean, especially when it comes to things like mental health, addiction, and those types of issues that need to be tackled by people that have professional training and understand what it is that they're trying to achieve, not just through prayer or love. And another thing that I wanted to quickly touch on that you said before is that you're being told from your employers and people kind of above you in the kind of pyramid, is that what you are doing is what is needed to be done to save these children. And then the children arrive at these programs and they're being told that what they need to do in the work they need to do in these programs is what needs to be done for them to save themselves. So it's almost like the same conversations and rhetoric and techniques are being used on not only the staff members, but the children participating in the programs as well.
And the thing to remember about that is the staff members are all clients. They're all former clients.
Right.
They're not hired from the outside. So you go from being a client to literally the next day you're in training, and their training is in-house. It's called the Meehan Institute of Counselor Training. So you go from being a client.
So fancy. That just sounds so fancy.
Right. You go from being a client to a trainee to a staff member within, 5 to 6 weeks. So that's the other thing too, is like, it's a constant cycle of these kids are in their program for a year, hearing all of that stuff, like the 12 steps is the only way. And if you relapse, there's a potential you would get drunk and then die because your disease wants you dead and all of that stuff. So of course, when they become employees, they're just turning around and saying that because they believe it at that point,
Yeah. And you said that you were with Atlanta Insight from 97 to 2002. So does that include your period of starting as a client and then going on to become a member of staff?
Yes.
Okay. So can you give us a bit of background on how you became involved in the program to start
Actually, it was
with?
1996 to 2002, if we're...
Right. Okay. So
Sure.
you were referred, or you were sent to, or became a part of your first enthusiastic sobriety program in 96.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was a traumatized teenager.
Okay.
By the time I got there, I had undiagnosed autism and bipolar disorder. And because, you know, in the 70s and 80s, like girls especially were not being diagnosed with autism. People in general weren't really, they didn't know as much about it then, but especially girls, and especially, you know, bipolar, you know, back then it was like, oh, she's just on her period, you know, like you know, the manic and depressive episodes were like, you know, well, she's just being a sensitive woman or whatever. And my parents' relationship was super unhealthy, and there was abuse going on, you know, in my home. My parents were in an MLM, a multi-level marketing company. And so the, you know, kind of the indoctrination, love bombing, a lot of the bite model stuff does apply to MLMs, especially this one, because it had a heavy religious component to it. And it was very similar to Bob Meehan's programs. And so I kind of grew up in that environment. So my dad was very abusive. My parents got divorced when I was 13. I was raped at school when I was 12.
Oh my goodness.
So there's just, you know, by the time I was, you know, 18, 19 years old, I was a mess. I was just a mess. And, you know, really, I have to give my mom a lot of credit. She did the best she could, you know, raising me and my brother. We were not easy kids to raise as a single mother. And, again, you know, her being involved in this MLM, they're very similar in that they don't really believe in psychiatry or medication. You know, it's all very religious, and it gets kind of into that new age, like positive thinking, Zig Ziglar, you know, how to make friends and influence people, all that stuff. So by the time I was 19 years old, you know, I had been drinking and kind of smoking weed a little bit. Like I wasn't really doing like hard drugs or anything, but I was, you know, alcohol and pot, like it made my brain stop, and it calmed down, you know, how I felt on the inside, because I just didn't know how to deal with it. And neither did anyone else in my life. So I ended up in this inpatient program. You know, a family member actually kind of like told on me and told my mom what was really going on with me, because I was really good at pretending to her like I was great and everything was great. And I managed to make it through high school with, you know, a pretty high GPA, even though I was either drunk or not at school. You know, I just managed to kind of sail through all of that. And that's my autism, you know. I do have a little bit of that like idiot savant, which no one uses that term anymore. That was something that was applied to me years ago. But, you know, that kind of intelligence, you know, when it came to like schoolwork. And then there, you know, with like common sense stuff, I'm a nightmare. Like I don't, you know, it's autism, you know, 100%. But so I ended up in this residential treatment center in Alabama. It was like a hospital in the woods, and they had a psychiatrist there who actually diagnosed me with bipolar. And he wanted to put me on medication. And because of all that brainwashing from the MLM, I was like, how dare you even suggest that, evil psychiatrist, like I'm here to get off drugs. Like I stood up and stormed out, made this big, you know, dramatic thing about it. And he was like, okay, don't take the medication then, you know. And then the rest of my time there was 12-step focused. And I, you know, I needed mental health treatment, period. And then they referred me to Atlanta Insight. Shocking. And so they had an intensive outpatient program that was, you know, 6 to 8 weeks, and was 4 hours a day. So I did that. You know, my insurance covered it for, you know, the time period that I was there. So my mom didn't have to come out of pocket a lot. I mean, she just put me through an inpatient program, so she was spending a lot of money on all of this, but
Wow, yeah.
so that was how I got my start, was I was referred from that inpatient program to do their outpatient program, and I did that for 6 weeks.
And do you have any idea in 96 how much they were charging for you to attend a program like that?
Yeah, the only thing they charge for is the intensive outpatient.
Yeah.
And it was $4,000 at that time.
Wow. Okay.
When I left in 2009, we were charging, I think, $8,500 for the 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah. That is so much money. Oh my goodness.
It's really not, though. Most worth the money programs for 6 to 8 week programs are anywhere from 10 grand to 120, depending on what, if you've got people with PhDs and licensure, that they need to get paid a lot more, so it's actually not in the treatment world, it's not that much. And for them, that's a selling point. They're like, we're the cheapest you're going to find, which is not good.
No, there's a reason for that.
Right. Your drug addiction treatment should not be cheap. It should not be the bargain basement, treatment program. It's just, today, I think people would look at it very differently, but yeah.
I mean, for a single parent of 2 children, that would still be around $1,000 a week. And I think,
oh yeah. I mean, it's
still on the lower end, but that's still a lot of money, isn't it? Especially for a lot of families that might not have access to things like health insurance.
Well, and they don't take insurance is the other thing.
Wow. Okay.
I think there are some now that do, but back then that was one of our, we don't take insurance because the insurance companies can't tell us how to treat people,
Right. Okay. Another one of them nice pieces of,
and that's a Bob, that's one of Bob's philosophies.
So you do this 6 to 8 week outpatient program. What does that look like in terms of what's the average day or week for participants? How many people are there? What restrictions are there in terms of food and clothing and activities?
The amount of people in the outpatient group depends. I was running an outpatient group right before I quit, and I would have anywhere from 5. I think at one point the most I had was 12 to 15 people.
Right.
My outpatient that I was in, I think there were 8 or 9 of us, and really it just turns into a trauma bonding situation. You've got our counselor at the time was 20.
Right.
She and I were the same age. She just happened to have 5 years sober. So
right.
That's what gave her, supervisory status. So she was hip and cool and pretty, and she had this long curly black hair, and she cussed and she smoked cigarettes, and that's their shtick, that they've got my counselor's just like me. Again, that should not be the case. They don't have to be doctors in white coats, but they should not be the same age. And she was younger than some of the people in my outpatient, because they separate the outpatients and the support groups by age. So there's younger group, which is 13 to 17. Older group is 18 to 25-ish. Sometimes they'll take older. And so I was 20, so I was in the older group, and there was a guy in there who was 25. So he's 5 years older than his counselor, he lived a lot of life that she had not, so essentially it was just, who can we make cry a lot today? It is what it was. It was, you need to talk about all your deep, dark secrets. And so it was essentially re-traumatizing people and then love bombing them to where they felt like, they'd gotten this release and they'd really let it go, and, things like that. And there weren't any restrictions on food. I mean, they didn't provide it. We had to go across the street, and, we would go to this Texaco across the street and eat gas station hot dogs. And whatever was cheap, because our parents were only allowed to give us a certain amount of spending money because they didn't want us to go use money to get high. And,
Right.
As far as clothing restrictions, I mean, essentially there's a lot of like puritanical shit in their philosophies, especially when it comes to women, It's very misogynistic. And, I look back at myself now and I'm like, oh my God, I was so hot and I thought I was so fat and ugly, but I would like kill to have that body again, And so I wore like pretty revealing clothing. I mean, like little halter tops with crop tops, things like that, because I was a 20-year-old woman, that was like, I mean, that's what you do when you're 20. And I definitely was told to like cover it up, and that I was a tease and I was flirting too much. And, they for sure take the stance that, if you're drunk and you get raped, you invited it because you got drunk,
gosh,
right. That kind of stuff. And I believed that for a long time. And I passed it on, like, if you hadn't been drunk, rape is not okay, but if you hadn't been drunk, if you hadn't put yourself in that situation, if you hadn't been wearing a short skirt, I mean, all of it, that's so
thing. Traumatizing for you though, personally, because of what you'd experienced at that point. So for you to be told that and to believe it must come with the connotation that you feel as if you maybe caused that situation to happen to yourself when you were in high school. That's awful. Oh, that's not.
Oh, that was elementary
professional
school.
help, is it? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no, 12 is elementary school. It was my elementary school where that happened.
Jeez.
And there were some other incidents like that later on in life, but yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's victim blaming under the guise of spirituality and under the guise of like, this is how you never put yourself in like, if you never get drunk again, which is not true. There are plenty of sober people who rape other sober people. Like, that's not drinking is not, does not make you rape proof. So yeah, that was so the broad answer to that is the restrictions were based on white supremacy and misogyny.
Right.
Very much so.
Okay. And did you have any affiliation with any religion before you joined this program?
Not really. I mean, like I said, the MLM my parents were in was very religious. It was kind of, white people, Protestant Christianity, which now has become evangelical. They're all evangelical now.
Right.
But and then my grandmother, on my dad's side, she was Catholic. So I had, the best of both worlds, just the Catholicism and the puritanical Christianity. So I fit right in at Atlanta Insight, I remember once my grandmother told me it started raining and she told me it's raining because God is crying because you're a bad girl.
Wow. Okay.
Those were the kind of messages I grew up with.
Fantastic. Great.
Yep. Great stuff.
So you complete this 6 to 8 week course and then you decide to become a permanent member of this program and to teach to others.
Yeah, it's not everybody decides to be a permanent member. What it is what they say is you pay for the intensive outpatient and then you have 2 years of aftercare. Right. Which is supposed to work. So they have their own support group meetings. They do twice a week. In some cases, 3 times a week. They would do like a Saturday morning, park meeting or whatever. So you're expected to attend both of those meetings. And then on the weekends, they do what they call functions on Friday and Saturday night. So you're pretty much like, it's all you do,
right?
And then there's unofficial stuff like you're supposed to hang out with people on Tuesday nights, and it's a good time to talk to your sponsor. So now we've got Tuesday nights filled, and so there's a meeting on Monday, then there's a hangout on Tuesday, and then a meeting on Thursday, function Friday, function Saturday. So you got Wednesdays and Sundays, which eventually became like when people would start dating in the aftercare portion of the group. You hung out with your boyfriend or girlfriend on Wednesdays and Sundays because the other days of the week, you were hanging out with the group. In order to have a healthy relationship, you need to make sure you kept up your relationships with other people.
Okay, but
So,
the main things that you have in common at this point with that significant other is this program.
yeah.
So even though you're spending time away from the program, you're still working on the program.
Yes. And
right,
your sponsors,
okay, wow.
most, and everybody has sponsors very similar to how AA is. And your sponsors are most likely friends or even a couple themselves. And so they're always talking. And so it's, they get to kind of like, well, he said that you did this. So did you do that? Like there's all these,
okay.
It's just this very controlled, situation. And so you do you're supposed to do the 2-year aftercare program and then graduate.
Right.
And the 2 years is meant to like help you start to put into action what you learned in outpatient, right? Mm-hmm. So how to work the steps and how to be a human being in the world, get a job, go back to school. And when I was there, a lot of that was suggested. Like it was, not even just suggested, like you were made fun of if you didn't have a job. So they did push like some of those things.
Do you mean like the staff would make fun of you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in my mind, they're kind of setting you up for this next step almost. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
Yeah. It's so just over the years, it's kind of ebbed and flowed. So, mm-hmm. We've set up this mass complaint form with the help of Breaking Code Silence, the nonprofit has. And so we're getting, we had someone fill out the complaint form who was in one of Bob's programs in 1976.
Wow.
So we've had a span of almost 50 years of people saying the exact same shit. However, there are certain things that kind of go back and forth. Like there, it's some periods of time, it's like, don't get a job or don't go back to school because you'll get, you'll turn into a liberal and liberals can't get sober. But then like my time period, we were encouraged to finish school and get jobs and be productive members of society. So that's what the 2 years are for. Then you graduate and you're supposed to just go out and take what you've learned and be a, good person and most likely go to AA and go to AA meetings. And that's how that works, unless you're deemed worthy enough to be on staff.
And that's what happened in your story with your next step.
Yeah, I didn't even make it 2 years. They put me on staff when I had 11 months sober.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where you stepped into your administrative role.
Yeah.
And saw some things and were complicit in some things that you're now actively trying to expose. And the only reason I'm skipping over this next part is because I'm aware that you've got another meeting that you need to.
I can push it back a little bit if I need to.
Yeah, I don't want to miss too much out, but
yeah. No, that's fine, because I know that I'm a tangent nightmare sometimes, but it's just such important information.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and especially because these facilities are not only still running in different states, but are opening all the time. So it's definitely something that is that's important to discuss and put out there for people to be aware of. So you are with this program till 2002, and what causes you to make the change over to the Step 2 recovery program?
I will try to make this as short as I can.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1998 is when I moved to Augusta to open the office there.
Right.
So I was like the office manager there, because remember, again, I was purely administrative.
Right.
And I worked down there from 1998 until almost until I left to go to Phoenix in 2002. And around 90, like towards mid 99, the director of the Atlanta program, he was like super abusive. it was awful. Like I mean, this is the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And I like fashion. I'm fashionable. I'm into the current trends. And I had this suede jacket that had like fringe on it. And it was so cool. And I loved it. And anything I wore like that was like fun and hip and trendy, he would say, "You look like a prostitute. Why are you wearing that?"
Wow. Okay.
To the point where my wardrobe became like khakis and solid color tops because it was, so that's some of the misogyny and weird puritanical stuff, and just a lot of other things that he was just generally awful. So he was fired. And at that point, this guy who was like a rising star in the program in Phoenix had been sent out to work with me in Augusta because the guy who I was working with before him also got fired. So he came out and it was just the two of us. So we shared an apartment and we just became like best friends. I mean, instantly clicked, like, where have you been all my life? Yeah. Best friends,
Yeah.
And he was the only person since I had been there, been in the group, worked there, any of it, that I felt comfortable completely being myself. Like I didn't have to put on this, like facade of like, yeah, like I'm such a, good, sober person. I could really kind of let it all hang out with him and same with me. And he was gay. He is gay. He's out now and has a partner and he's super happy and just is living his best life. But that's not allowed. You're not allowed to have gay staff members.
Right.
Homosexuality to them is, again, a symptom of your disease. They say it's a symptom of watching too much porn. Back then it was very frowned upon. And so they were really hard on him and made him start dating one of the women who was like, she'd been around for a long time. And she was kind of Clint's one of his golden children. Like,
right.
She had known Clint from the beginning. He was running the program when she got sober. And her dad also gave a lot of money to the program. So that helped a lot. And so they kind of put them together so that they said it would butch him up and make him seem less gay because some of the parents were concerned about a gay man working with their children. Again, late 90s, early 80s.
Right.
And he cracked under the pressure and he started getting high. We had both, when the director had been fired, they made him the interim director and they made me the interim administrator for both programs. So he and I were going back and forth between Augusta and Atlanta, running both programs essentially. And because we were so close when it came out what was going on with him, I was told that I was guilty by association, that I was complicit in everything that he did because I was so close to him. Now, we were all sober, like it never, ever crossed my mind that he might be getting high. I knew he was not okay. I knew there was something going on. And I had actually raised the alarm bells to the other directors and said, hey, something is not right with him. I don't know what it is, but something is not right. And so, his girlfriend that he was literally living with,
oh my goodness,
she was let off the hook because she was one of Clint's favorites. But they made it about my defects of character. And because I was competitive with his girlfriend, I just sat by and watched it happen because I wanted it to hurt her. I mean, at the time, like I look back now and I'm like, how did I accept that?
Yeah, I mean,
how did I accept that?
In terms of the work that you're supposed to be doing with these troubled children, and forcing somebody to like repress their sexuality, I guess that has nothing to do with it then. It's obviously the people that he's associating with that are causing this relapse.
Yeah. So what happened there is they told me there was a woman in Phoenix, and I already knew her. I had been talking to her kind of off and on, because if you had like a particular issue show up, they would be like, you need to call this person. She's been through that.
Right.
So she was one of my people I would call about, if I was competitive, or if I, was horny, or, anything like that, because I was also single. Because when I was, in older group, I was one of the older women, because they had just started older group when I got there. So a lot of people had just turned 18 that were in younger groups. So older group was like a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds and me, who was 21, 22 while I was there.
Right.
And so like I was too old to date any of the like younger guys, and I didn't like any of them anyway. That they made me date all these guys, and I just wasn't into them.
No.
And I had gotten into a relationship with this one guy. And essentially Clint, they put us together, and Clint told him, I won't sign your paycheck until you ask her on a date in front of me.
Oh,
like
gosh.
I heard all of this. And then this is the guy that in the article, my employer and his wife, who was my sponsor, pulled me into the director's office. This is the guy who eventually got fired, and told me because I didn't want to have sex with him, and I wouldn't. And because I wasn't really into him.
No.
And so they pulled me in and told me that if I wasn't going to have sex with him, I should at least give him a blowjob, because that was being a good girlfriend.
Wait. So
it's nuts, Casey.
You can't wear a fringe jacket or anything that it's not modest enough or puritanical enough, but you should at least give this guy a blowjob.
That was a woman's job. Yeah. That's
so
very
contradictory. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, but that's evangelical Christianity, though, like that. And that's very common in AA as well. A lot of women that I knew in AA, it would be like, if you don't want to have sex, that's fine, but at least get your husband or boyfriend off, because guys are different, and guys' sex drive is different. That's very common in those programs. Oh yeah.
I honestly thought that you were going to say it's more like no sex before marriage.
Oh no.
That has just completely like they're basically like almost encouraging prostitution, because they're not going to sign his paycheck until he asks you on a date, and that implies that you're at least going to give him fellatio. So
yeah. So where were we? Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, and of course it was all written off to like, I have issues with sex. There was a lot of pornography in my house when I was growing up. And it was readily available. So they all knew that was part of my history. So it was always kind of back to like, well, you have issues with sex because of pornography.
And these sessions that you did where you willingly gave up this information to aid in your own recovery is now being used against you years down the line, when you're employed by
my employers
supposed to help you.
Yes,
oh,
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So they told me basically like I had to go work with this woman as her employee, and with her being my sponsor / amateur therapist, to like fix me, because I was so broken, and my character defects had taken over, and I was going to get high if I didn't get my shit together. And so that's how I ended up working in Phoenix at Step 2, because the woman who owned Step 2 at the time, and she's named in the article, her name is Renee. She was the person who was going to, put me back together, or I mean, how they would say it is like, she's going to, encourage you and help you to, fix yourself, because they always tried to stay away from like, we fix people, or, it's always that, but it's like, no, they just wanted her to fix me. Like, that's all it was.
Right.
So that's how I ended up in Phoenix. And I worked at Step 2 as the administrator there, administrative assistant to Renee, because she was the administrator and she owned the company, but she was part of the family. And at that time, Bob Meehan actually owned Step 2. So I was technically working directly for Bob and his wife. They owned Step 2 at the time.
It's kind of given me like, obviously it's just giving me weird Nexium vibes in the way
Oh
that
yeah.
like,
And Scientology.
and yeah, in the way that like everything that you do is monitored and fed back to somebody, and then somebody else will get in touch with you and say, oh, so and so's told me that you're struggling with this, and the fact that you're supposed to get in touch with your sponsor to tell them if you're feeling like a little bit sexually frustrated,
Right.
like it's given me kind of like those weird Nexium vibes when people would have to
Yes.
text the person above
Yes.
them.
And collateral.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, you end up staying there for another 7 years. So how does
she
that
left.
happen?
When the family moved back to Georgia, she went with them.
Right.
So that relieved some of the pressure off of me that she was at least 2,000 miles away.
Right.
Working for her was the worst experience, not only of me being there, but of my life. I mean, It was horrific. I have had people who worked with me at step 2 during that time come back to me and apologize to me for not saying something about how abusive she was, for just standing by and watching her abuse me.
That is horrific.
I know. And it's because, and I don't blame them. I appreciate, the sentiment, but they were under the same pressure I was, they couldn't stand up to her. Yeah. She was Bob's girl. I mean, she was Bob's right-hand woman. So nobody messed with her, except Bob's wife, who was abusing her as badly as she abused me. So I can, I have a little bit
There's
of
a pattern there.
Yeah, but not a lot. And
I'm sure you didn't go on to do that to, people who were
not the way that she did. Not the way that she did.
I remember
program saying at some point, I wish I could find a sponsor who sponsored people the way I do, because she was so horrible to me. So now also understand, again, incestuous, she's my employer, she's my boss, and my sponsor.
How are you supposed to
right.
How are you supposed to, your sponsor is supposed to be somebody that I don't know.
You can complain to about your boss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Somebody that keeps you on the straight and narrow, but not the person that's going to potentially cause you to fall off the wagon or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it was insane because, then my spiritual condition is being merged with my job performance. If there were only, because at the time, the step 2 house could take up to 10 people. They charged $16,000 per person. Okay. Right. So if there's 10 people in, and in order to kind of cover costs, you need to have at least 5 people, in the program.
In the program, right.
In the house. Yeah. So if we dipped below that, it was like, I was under this microscope now, like what's going on? Why are people not coming into step 2? You're closed off. You're not inviting people, because it was, their belief was that, if you were right with God and you were doing what you needed to do, you would, magnetize people to, I know it's insane. I can't believe it was my life for 12 years. I really can't.
So basically you're being told now that if you're not right with God, he won't send you victims of substance abuse.
Yes.
To give the families some more money.
Yes. That's where it gets really sick and really abusive, because I was constantly like, if I had a bad thought, or if I, there was food in the house for the kids and we weren't supposed to eat it. And one day I didn't have breakfast, so I ate a Pop-Tart, and then I was like riddled with anxiety because I had to tell someone I ate a Pop-Tart. Like, it's insane. It's insane. It's completely nuts. So So yeah, she left, and then they tried to put someone else in charge. That she was just she and her husband were just normal people who were in 12-step recovery, and
Right.
they were like, fuck this. Like, they didn't last very long.
Yeah.
And they definitely were abusive to me as well. They kind of took Renee's playbook with how I was treated there. And then Bob called me and was like, listen, they don't want to be there anymore, and I want you to run step 2. Are you cool with that? And I was like, hell yes. Like, put me in charge,
Yeah.
And so I was which unfortunately meant the abuse just got worse, because now I was almost solely responsible for the success of step 2. And I don't know really how that worked looking back. Like, why didn't I ever say, like, wait, but you own the place. Like, are you not spiritually right? Why is it all on me? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you would never question those people, because they have made you believe that they are themselves doing everything perfectly. And you aren't. So it's never, it would never come back on them. No, never.
No, never. So I did that. And then the 2005 media blitz happened, and it caused problems financially for all the programs. So around 2006, pretty much all the programs went broke.
Right.
And I had been asked Clint had called me and asked me to move to Atlanta to be the administrator for both Atlanta Insight and Step 2, because they have one in Georgia. Right. And I was so excited. Like, yes, absolutely. I would love to do that. A lot of my good friends that I had known since I gotten sober lived and worked out there. And my family was there. I grew up in Atlanta. So I was super excited about it. And it was happening. Clint and I were talking about when I was going to get there, and how much the truck was going to be. And I had packed up all my stuff. I had told my roommates we had ended our lease on our apartment. They were getting an apartment, just the two of them. I had everything packed. I had the truck at a down payment on a truck. And I had trained someone to do my job at Step 2. So I had quit working at Step 2.
Okay.
And then he calls me and says, never mind. A week before I was supposed to move there, he calls me and says, never mind. There's too much change going on, and I don't want to add to it. And I was like, okay. And then, of course, later, talking to my sponsor, Renee, about it, she made it about my spiritual condition.
Okay.
So somehow I had shut that door, and I had caused that to happen.
I don't even have any words for.
This is why I've started a nonprofit, to shut these programs down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because my story is not even the worst one you would hear.
No.
There are worse. So at that point I was like, well, I'm homeless and jobless. What the hell am I going to do? Mm-hmm. And so the director of Pathway at the time, Josh, he was like, why don't you come run older group outpatient? I had no education. I didn't even have certification, because I'd been administrative. But he was like, you know what? You're really good at helping people, and you're pretty open and good at sharing your experience, and you're genuine and you're kind. So I think you'd be great. And I was like, okay, I just needed a job. And that was one of the first times that I was like, what would I do if I didn't work here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where would I get a job?
Yeah, my mom always said to me when I was growing up, she said, you can find yourself a partner who will take care of you financially and, make sure that you don't have to worry about anything. But then if that partner walked away from you, what would you have left? And she said, always make sure that you have yourself sorted and that you are not reliant on anybody else. So when I bought my first house, I bought it myself. I was single at the time. And now me and my partner have a lovely home together. But I remember one of my friends saying to me, don't you want to wait until you've settled down with somebody before you buy your first house? And I just said, no, I don't want to do that. I absolutely don't want to do that. I want to make sure
Absolutely
that
not.
that I can take care of myself. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um
I didn't get married till I was 40. And I'm so happy about it. I loved being single. I loved living by myself. I loved being able to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. Well, until I got dogs, at least. And then, I had some responsibilities. But yeah, I recommend waiting until you're in your late 30s or early 40s. Because if I had married any of the guys I thought I wanted to in my 20s, it would not be a pretty picture at this point. It would just not be.
It sounds like there was no room or space in your life for anything.
Well, no,
like
there
that.
wasn't. There wasn't for sure. But I always like to tell people, like, it's okay. You don't have to get married.
Everybody's on a different timeline, aren't they? There's no set time to
and people will be like, why are you still single? And I would be like, because I haven't met anyone that I want to marry.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't mean something about someone if they're not married when they're 25. It doesn't mean they're damaged goods. It just means they haven't met someone that they want to marry.
Yep, absolutely. And some people don't even want to marry. So
exactly. I didn't either. I mean, my husband and I, when we met, he had just gotten divorced, and we were like, do you want to get married? And it was kind of like, not really. I mean, we knew we wanted to be together forever, but we were like, we don't, and then I had a bunch of health issues, and he was like, okay, now I want to get married because I want you to have my health insurance. Yeah. And I was like, okay, cool. That sounds great. So
there's different reasons for different people, isn't there, to make that decision. If it's something that ends up happening with me and my partner, it wouldn't be from a religious standpoint. It wouldn't be for that. It would be more for the security of our family, I think. But that's just us personally, I think.
For sure.
And to share a common family name, to have the same last name that my children have, which is his last name. So that definitely plays a part in it as well. But yeah, not from a religious standpoint. So yeah, you then go to Pathway, and you've got this Josh guy who's like really blasé about who's running these programs, and he's like, you've been involved for years, exactly how the programs run. That's fine, you come and do it.
Right. Well, and the point I was getting to was, he hired me. I started running outpatient. I loved it. I just got to sit in this room with these, young adults who are struggling and just be like, how can I help? Like, what do you need from me? And I started running outpatient, and then the 15th came around and I didn't get a paycheck. And I was like, that's weird. And my sponsor, still Renee, she also managed the books for all the programs. So I was like, what am I supposed to do here? Because you did not talk about money in this program. You weren't supposed to care about money. It was supposed to be all about helping people and changing the world. And again, if you were right with God, your finances would always be taken care of, always. So you weren't really supposed to care, which I was starting to care. I was 32 years old, and my roommate was 18 and wanted me to sleep on the couch so she could have her boyfriend spend the night. And I was getting like, I don't know that this is really my jam anymore, but I couldn't afford to live on my own. And if you were, if you wanted to live by yourself, it definitely meant something was wrong with you, because you didn't want to be around people all the time, which again, a lot of that rhetoric and that activity seriously triggered my autism. I have serious sensory processing issues. I don't like to be around a lot of people. It drains me. Yeah. But that's the culture of the program. So I was constantly getting this, like, what's wrong with you? Why do you seem so tired? You seem very insecure, like what? And now I look back and I'm like, oh, that was autism. Like, that's all that was, know? Yeah. Anyway, so, I, because I had to pay bills, I called my sponsor and said, hey, listen, what's going on? I didn't get a paycheck. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, well, you need to go talk to Josh. And so can we talk about how weird it is that I had to go to my boss and say, why didn't I get a paycheck?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that should have been the first thing he said to me. I'm offering you this job. You're not going to be getting paid.
Oh,
like,
wow.
That was never, I didn't know that until I just didn't get a paycheck. So,
oh my goodness. Okay.
And then because I'm asking, it's like, I'm the bad guy because like, why are you even asking this question? Why do you even care?
But he's not given you a volunteer role. He's offered you employment.
A job. Yeah. So that period of time was crazy. I had no credit card debt. I had great credit. I had very little savings because I barely made $25,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And this is it. I've been working for these people for 10 years and I'm making, I'm in my 30s making 25 grand a year. It's ridiculous. And I had to ask my mom for money to help me pay rent. I had to get a credit card and put stuff on credit cards. It was insane. And so then I had to it was like, well, everybody else is just getting a part-time job. And again, remember, I'm committed to this. I'm believing that what I'm doing is not only saving the lives of other people, but it's saving my life. Like I, at this point, believed that if I didn't have the level of accountability I had working there, because I lived and worked and breathed with these people, that if I didn't have that level of accountability, I would get drunk and die. I mean, that's really what they made me believe.
Yeah, life or death, absolutely. And similar to people I've spoken to who are brought up with the strong imagery of burning in hellfire if they go and watch Lord of the Rings or something outside of their kind of insular little hive. So I can see some parallels there in some sects of Christianity and the imagery and rhetoric that they use in kind of what's been instilled in you, but just with the drugs and alcohol side of it instead.
Yeah. And so me quitting my job and getting another job was never even an option. I never even considered that. So I just got a part-time job. So I was working at Einstein Bagels and I would go in at 4:30 in the morning and I would open the store and I would work till 10:30 because that's their morning rush.
Yeah.
And then I would change in the bathroom and drive to Pathway and run group from 12:30 to 4:30.
Oh my goodness.
And then I would do individual appointments. And then a lot of people did leave and go get full-time jobs. And so I was also running meetings on Mondays and Thursdays. I was running parent meetings. Every other Wednesday, I had an aftercare group I did with the people who had graduated from my outpatient. Friday and Saturdays, I was going to functions, I was working my ass off. So
absolutely.
I'm working,
I mean, from what you've just said there, you opened up the Einstein Bagels at 4:00 and finished at Pathway at 4:00. So you've done a 12-hour day before you've even gone to do these appointments that you were working on after 4 p.m. So one thing that I'm noticing here is even though you have lived and breathed this program for as long as you can remember around these people, your work ethic is absolutely incredible at this point.
Oh yeah. That's what they loved about me so much. I'm
sure it would have been easy for you to actually leave and walk into another job, even though you haven't gone on to further education. And I think as well, sometimes people will say, I saw a thing the other day and it really rang true with me. Sometimes people will brag that they've worked an 80-hour week, like it's something to be proud of, but they've needed to work that many hours to provide for themselves or their family. And it's almost like people who are working class have been taught to take pride in the amount of hours that they have to slug to make the bare minimum. So
Yeah, to survive.
You probably finished this 80 to 100-hour week and you're like, wow, look at me balancing all of these things and doing all of these things so well, when actually realistically no one should have to do that much just to get by.
No, and I, my whole thing was, well, I definitely wanted to stay in the good graces of all the higher ups. My sponsor and her husband were like, oh, this is so honorable and this is so great that you're doing this and good for you. And,
because they're not having to pay you a single penny for all the work that you're doing.
Right. And then, and for part of the time I was still doing all of the invoicing and accounting for step 2.
Right.
Which Renee told me, because she had bought me a laptop to work at step 2 because the computer died. And so what she said was, if I would continue doing the books at step 2, that would be me paying off the laptop and it could be mine.
Right. Okay.
So she wasn't paying me for that either.
No.
It's insane.
Yeah.
So what I really felt like in my heart that I was doing by working so much was, if I just worked my ass off and I put all this good stuff out into the world, it would bring people to the program and we would start making money again. And eventually I would start getting paid again.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I believed. And so I did that with, and at some point Josh started paying me like $500 every 2 weeks. So I was making like $1,000 a month. So I at least had some income coming in.
Yeah.
But again, let's remember this is 2008. So I have now been working there for 11 years and I'm making $1,000 a month. And in 2008, my dad died.
Right.
And this wasn't a surprise. My dad actually was an addict and an alcoholic, and we hadn't spoken in almost 10 years when he died. But it was, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but anyone who has a parent like that, where they're not in your lives or not in your life, you always have this hope that like one day something will happen and one day it'll be okay. And you'll have this person back in your life again. So when you have that situation with a parent and then they die, there's grieving the death and there's grieving this person's never going to be in my life again. So it was rough. It was a very rough time for me. And the people at Pathway made, I flew out to Atlanta and helped my brother with his funeral and all this stuff. And it was like, all right, let's get back to work. Like, Josh had, lost a parent, and he was like, you just got to laugh about it. You just got to laugh about it and make jokes about how, you're a bastard child now and, and whatever. And I was like, okay.
No.
But something about my dad's death flipped a switch in me, and I stopped playing the game. I stopped tempering everything that I said. And I stopped trying to communicate in a way that would sound like I was coming from a very programmatic, spiritual place. I just started saying what I thought all the time.
Yeah.
And it did not go over well. People did not like it.
No.
Not even a little bit. And that's really what started me down the path of like, I don't think I want to do this anymore.
No.
Like I'm 33 years old. I'm broke. I've got nothing to show for the 12 years I've put into this place.
And people treat you like crap.
Right. Which I didn't get that at that time. At that time, I thought the way I was being treated was, understandable. So yeah, that's when I called Renee and said, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And she was like, okay, because I think they were getting a little sick and tired of my mouth at that point. So yeah, that was October of 2009. And everyone was like, well, what are you going to do? I mean, have you found a new purpose? And I was like, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm actually going to speak out against all of you guys.
Well, I mean, remember, this was 2009 and it's now 2021. I had no plans of speaking out about anything at that time. I ended up getting a job at a massage MD. And I also got my job back at Einstein Bagels because I had quit at some point because Josh started paying me and promised me soon you will be getting your full paychecks again,
Right.
which, you know, I was making like $2,500 a month, which is still not great. But so I had quit that job, and my manager at that Einstein Bagels, she was phenomenal. She was just one of the best people I've ever known in my life. And she helped me out so much. Because, you know, you're also led to believe that like normal people aren't on your level, and they're probably all watching porn and getting drunk and, you know, like
dancing with the devil. Yeah.
Yeah. And working at Einstein's, I just met these amazing, wonderful people. I still talk to them.
Yeah.
We're all friends on Facebook. We still talk. I mean, I adore them, and they were wonderful people. And you know what? They weren't sober, and it was fine, you know?
And also they're probably just regular old people that aren't associated with this program. Yeah. So, you know, you meet a few people in your life that, you know, like you spoke about with your roommate, the people that you click with instantly, and you make these bonds for life. And then there's just average everyday people that are just decent, and they have good conversation, and they have worldly experiences that they can tell you about, and you can sit there and talk with them. But if you're coming from your situation into working at a place like Einstein's, and you're just meeting regular people, they could seem like the most incredible and special people in the whole world because they're just average and decent, and so much better than all of these other people that you've been surrounded by for all of this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My supervisor was 18 years old. And I hated it. I hated everything about it. I felt like a failure. I felt like a loser. I was also homeless. The people that I was living with who worked for the program were like, you know, if you're not going to work here anymore, you got to go.
Wow. Okay.
So I was I was working again, 4:30 to 10:30 at Einstein's, 11 to 7 at Massage MD, going to sleep either in my car or on someone's couch, and then getting back up at 4:30 and doing it all over again and over and over and over.
There's that great Christian charity.
Yep. Yep. So I managed to get caught up on all my bills. When my manager at Einstein's found out that I was homeless, she was like, "Are you kidding me? You're moving into my house immediately. Pack up your shit and be in my driveway tonight." She let me stay in her guest room for free. She didn't charge me anything. She fed me. She was amazing. I wouldn't have gas money sometimes, so she would make sure our schedules were the same. So I would ride. She could
drive
her.
you in. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Oh, incredible.
Just the best person. I'm still friends with her. I still talk to her, you know. I mean, they're just so great. So anyway, I managed to catch up on all my bills. And then I decided I just wanted to move back to Georgia and be around my family. So I did. And I called my mom, and she flew out, and she drove back I sold everything I had that wouldn't fit in my truck. I had a Tahoe, and we packed up and we drove across the country, and I pulled into Atlanta with $11 in my checking account.
Wow. Okay.
And I had already interviewed for a job over the phone. While I was still in Phoenix, a friend of mine had connected me with a woman who was looking for an assistant. And she really liked me, but she was like, "I can't hire you having never met you. So when you get to Atlanta, do you want to come in for like an in-person interview?" And I ended up working for her for 8 years.
Wow. Okay.
And she was an organizational psychologist, and she didn't do clinical work. She did research, and she worked with, large organizations to help them with change management, basically.
Okay.
But oh my God. I mean, it was the best 8 years of my life. I learned so much. I had so much fun. She was wonderful to me. I didn't have to worry about my spiritual condition. If she didn't like something I did, she'd come in and be like, "Hey, don't do that." And I'd be like, "Oh, okay, cool." And that was it. Like I got raises, and it was great. So anyway, I'm sorry, we got way off topic. So
no, I think it's important. It's an important part of your journey. And when we have these discussions and talk about these different experiences that people have had, all these tiny little faucets all kind of add to where you are now on your journey. And we're going to talk a bit about your podcast and your nonprofit. And, you know, you might not have arrived at a place to be able to start those things if you didn't have these other little experiences as well. And I think it's always important to allow people who have been in similar situations of abuse and coercive control to allow them to see that there are good people out there and there are good experiences. And if somebody is just coming out of their movement now, you know, you went from having $11 in your account and spending a large percentage of your life with somebody who was so abusive towards you. And you said that they were the worst years of your life, and you'd experienced some pretty traumatic things before you even met her. So for you to say that those experiences were not as bad as spending time with this woman, really speaks volumes. So it's important to highlight the fact that you can come out of these situations and meet people that will change your life for the better and take care of you. And you know, you can tell them things that you might not want to admit, like, I'm living in my car, and they'll say, that's absolutely ridiculous, come to my house and I'll take care of you. So we should take a minute to say thank you to those people who are amazing, and all these people that I have the absolute privilege to speak to and hear their stories will say, my friend, my husband, my wife, my mum, my dad, my children had this conversation with me and listened to me and allowed me to start my healing process. So just a massive thank you to all those people who are just incredible. But at some point you do decide that you want to make political and social change around these programs. And where does that come from? How does that start?
It took me about 5 years after I left to really understand what had happened.
Right.
Because I stayed in AA. I kept going to AA meetings. I still believed I was an alcoholic. I still believed, they used to tell me I was sicker than others. I still believed I was sicker than others. And that if I didn't have that level of accountability in my life, I would inevitably get drunk and die. And in 2013, I almost married this guy that I met in AA, and it turned out he was a total sociopath. And thankfully, I canceled the wedding a month before.
Oh my goodness.
But when things were going, kind of off the rails with he and I before we got married, we weren't getting married in a church. We weren't religious. So, and they normally do marriage counseling prior to if you're getting married in a church. So I was like, why don't we do some marriage counseling? So I found this therapist who did marriage counseling, and we started seeing her. And that's when things really I went like, oh, I'm not marrying this guy. Like it just, I started to see the truth of who he really was, because the very nature of a sociopath is you don't know they're a sociopath. Usually until it's much too late. I always tell people it was like the movie Sleeping with the Enemy, where he was like this perfect, wonderful man until he had a ring on my finger and I moved in with him. And literally the night I moved in with him, he became a monster. And I was like, what is happening?
And he thinks at that point that you can't walk away, but you're like, actually, yes, I can. And I'm going
Little did he know I'd survived a cult, and absolutely I was going to get the hell out of there.
Arguably, I mean, you could say that you've survived too, with the upbringing that you had, being involved in the MLMs as well.
So I kept seeing that therapist, and thank you so much, Joanne, because she saved my life, really. But the other thing that happened around that time is I was listening to This American Life, and there was an episode called The Leap. And they actually just replayed it. They replay it like once every 6 months to a year because it's such a good episode. And you know how there's 3 acts. I don't know if you know this. In This American Life, there are 3 acts. So they usually interview 3 different people. So there are 3 sections of the podcast. The third was this woman named Tina Dupuy, who again, I have to thank Tina because she played a big role in me figuring all this out.
Yeah.
And she didn't have to. Tina's a very busy journalist, and she's like famous. I had no idea. I just heard her talking on the podcast. She had been in AA since she was 13. She was raised in a cult. And at 30 some years old with almost 20 years sober, which I had almost 20 years sober at this point, she went, I don't think I'm an alcoholic.
Right.
And it was like, I was like, oh my God, I don't think I am either. So I messaged her on Facebook having no idea like who she was, other than she was this woman who had been in AA and was going through the same shit. And Tina, she messaged me back and we talked on the phone for hours.
Amazing. Wow. That's great.
We talked on the phone many other times, and she really helped me see, a lot of the craziness. A lot of it was attached to AA because there's a lot of similarities between AA and Meehan's programs.
Yeah.
Not all of AA is like that. I want to make that disclaimer. I do think AA is very good for some people. I think it does help them recover. I don't think it's the right fit for every single person, though.
No.
And I went into my therapist's office and said, I don't think I'm an alcoholic.
Wow.
And she was like, oh, thank God, finally.
Wow. So she wanted you to have that epiphany on your own. Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah. And that was just such an incredible, because in the program, you're not really allowed to say that. You really aren't allowed to question if you're an alcoholic. What they would say is people who aren't alcoholics don't question if they're alcoholics or not.
Right.
And that was always, your disease is trying to kill you. And they would always, their shtick was, and they say this in AA too, that like, it's the saying that like, while you're sitting in a meeting, your disease is in the parking lot doing push-ups. Like the longer you're sober, the sicker you get. Right. So questioning your alcoholism was obviously a reflection of your sickness. So it was a really big deal for me to say that out loud. It was a really big deal. And I was like, should I drink? Like, do I need to do that? Like, because it was like, what if I die? Like, what if I really am an alcoholic and I die,
But you've kind of come up with this theory that maybe you're not, and you're not sure whether you should test the theory.
Right. And I eventually got to this place where I was like, I don't need to drink to know that I am not an alcoholic. I don't. And so I didn't. I just stopped going to meetings. I had hated going to meetings for a while. I didn't feel like I needed to be accountable. I didn't feel like I needed to call my sponsor. People were pulling me aside after meetings and were like, you just seem like you're happy and okay all the time. What's really going on?
Yeah. And
it was like,
have you taken something?
Right. It was like, how is that not success? Like, how is that a problem? What? Why is that? Why are you suspicious of someone who's happy? Why does there have
to be something wrong? Yeah.
Isn't that the goal of us being here? But it really did. Like, I was like, I don't feel like I relate to these people anymore. And I never had, I would say I did. And this is something that comes up that's come up in our mass complaint a lot, is a lot of people exaggerated their use. Because you wanted to fit in, because when you get the love bombing that happens and when you first get into this program, you don't want it to go away.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will kind of, be like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic and yeah, I want to drink all the time, but I never really did. And if I got upset about something, I didn't want to go drink. I would hear people say like, oh God, this happened and it made me want to drink. And that was never my thing. I would want to die. I would literally want to die when things happen that were emotionally hard for me. And that's called bipolar disorder, but I would say I did, because I didn't ever want to not fit in. And so I was really starting to like say those things out loud, and my therapist helped so much. And so I just stopped going to meetings, and it was like my life got exponentially better. I was so relieved. I was so happy, and then I did eventually have a glass of wine, a couple of months later, and it was like, I'm fine, and I drink socially now, but I'm not a big drinker. I don't really like it that much. And, you know,
but your life is not dictated by
right.
alcohol.
Right. Like I don't have to go to restaurants and be like, do you cook that in alcohol? I need to know because you know, even if you accidentally have a steak that was marinated in red wine, that's going to set off your addiction, you know, and that's, you know, and you'll have to go back to the first step and, you know, all that craziness. And
even just the pressure of being, you know, going to a friend's house and they're offering everyone a drink and then they offer you a drink and then they say, oh no, sorry, you know, because I have a milk allergy, so I can't eat anything with milk in. And I'll go to a birthday party and the cake will go around and they'll go, chocolate cake? Oh no, oh. And I'm like, honestly, it's fine. Like it's okay. But to not have that worry is, you know, I had a vegan friend and I went to her birthday party, and when they started offering around cake and they were like, cake, and I was like, yes, thank you, because I didn't have to worry about
didn't have any dairy.
But to be able to just not make other people feel uncomfortable, because you can say yes or no to that alcoholic drink and that's fine. It is, I don't know, there's so many things that must have changed in that moment where you said to yourself, do you know what, if I want to have a drink I will, but I don't need to. And if I do have one, I don't need to have 10 more, because I'm not dealing with the addiction like I was told I was, you know.
Well, and two, like trying to think of how to put this into words. I just felt like a normal person.
Yeah.
You know, because when you're involved, especially in 12-step programs, addiction is considered they call it a terminal illness, you know, and that you're constantly working to keep from dying. You know what I mean?
And I believe for some people that is the case.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
But it's not one shoe fits all, is it?
Yeah. And not and to an extent, especially in enthusiastic sobriety programs, you get this arrogance, you know, like the way that they talk about being involved, especially at the staff level of these programs, is like you're like a higher being, like you're in on the secret, you know, like, you know, things spiritually, like I remember in one purpose meeting, those were these, you know, unpaid staff meetings we would do twice a month, where it was, you know, we all had to talk about our personal shit to make sure that we were right enough to, you know, be good employees. I remember someone being like, okay, but if there are no victims and only volunteers, like what about plane crashes? And I remember, I don't know if it was Bob or Clint, was like, well, you know, enough people on that plane wanted to die. Like everyone on that plane. Yeah. Everyone on that plane, for some reason, invited that situation into their life, you know? And that's, and it's this, like, we get that, we know that secret, we know what's really happening. And so you also have this like sense of superiority that comes from all that too, that definitely keeps you. And that's part of the keeping everything very insular, because then, you know, you only want to associate with people that you can be like, did you hear what happened to so-and-so? They must have invited it, you know? And you just think it's very similar to the alt-right right now and QAnon. You know, they all have this like there's no way to present them with facts, because they all believe they really know what's going on and we're all just idiots, you know? So there's no way, it's really hard to break through those people, because they think that, you know, they know what's really going on and we're just, you know, we're just too dumb to figure it out. So anyway, that's very much. And so not having that like pressure of like constantly being like, I'm right and I know what's really going on. I mean, it was like freedom like I hadn't felt in a long time. You know, it was amazing. And then I met my husband, because I was also terrified to date anybody that wasn't either sober or like barely drank. And he and I actually got together in the midst of me going through all of this. bless his heart, he's amazing. And he was super supportive, and he was just incredible through all of this, and still is to this day. But yeah, so that kind of happened. And then it was probably around 2016, whenever the podcast Uncover, when they did the thing on Nexium, and then Leah Remini's Scientology series, I was like, we need to do this. Like, I mean, I think I even emailed A&E. Like, I was like, who can I talk to? I've got a story to tell. Like, this is going to blow your mind.
I was thinking earlier, like, your life is such a roller coaster, like from start to where you are now, that a memoir should definitely be on the cards.
People tell me that all the time. Like, you got to write a book, because I mean, there are stories from me being a teenager that are wild too. But yeah, so that kind of started the fire in me. But the other thing, and I talked about this on our last podcast, it actually isn't live yet. But they also, because, all that stuff happened in 2005 with the media.
Yeah.
And, on the inside, like our group, the way we were dealing with it was, these people are killing children, because where are kids going to go? We're the only ones who can really help them. So by putting out bad information about us, they're responsible for the deaths of children.
Right.
And so it was kind of scary. Like, I kept kind of backing off, because I was like, there isn't a lot out there for adolescents. There's not. And teenagers are treated horribly everywhere. Like, there's not that many great treatment centers for adolescents, and so that would hold me back until 2020, when this Facebook group popped up and someone invited me to it. And I started reading everyone's stories, and I started seeing that it had gotten worse, and that the abuse that was happening had gotten worse. And I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't not try.
Yeah. Yeah.
And someone said to me, the amount of suicides and overdoses coming out of that program are astronomical. So kids are already dying. They're already dying
as a result of the program.
As a result.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what kind of got me past that. And then, a group of us kind of got together, and Liz, she's my business partner, and she's phenomenal. Like, she's amazing. She and I kind of took it and ran with it, and at some point we were doing Zoom meetings with people. Like, we started the social media accounts, and then Blake, who we had her on our third episode of our podcast. And I think you've been emailing with her.
Yes. Yeah.
She had that Instagram account that's now called Meehan Program Survivors, where people can anonymously send her stories. And I was reading some of those stories. I mean, she would send me screenshots of stuff people sent to her, and she vets everything. She tries to get corroboration, and she makes sure, she says, do you want to be anonymous, or do you want your name involved? Like, she's amazing with that stuff. And I would just be all caps texting them, like, this is unacceptable. The stories we are getting are unacceptable. And that's really what fuels us, is we've got to stop the abuse. It's just got to stop.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's kind of how all of that started, was, Liz and I and a couple of other people who were like, let's form a nonprofit. That way we're protected. No one can come after our personal stuff. And I have a business lawyer that's phenomenal. I've been running my own business for years. And so I went to her and went, all right, we want to set this up, help, and she helped us set it up. And, then the podcast, I was just driving home from the grocery store one day, and I was like, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I was like, we should do a podcast. And I called Liz and said, let's do a podcast. And she was like, I don't know, I've never done one before. And I was like, me either. I listen to a lot of them though. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
And she was like, all right. And once a week she'll text me and be like, this is the best idea you've ever had. And so, yeah, so we've got, Liz does all of the enthusiastic sobriety abuse social media, and she is a beast. And she and she manages the mass complaint form, which has over 150 responses at this point.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's incredible.
Yeah. So she will pull data from that and do those social media posts that just blow people away. And it's like, we're finally getting it out there. Daniel's article, he was working on that for 4 years.
Wow.
And so I can't even explain to you.
Is this the one you sent me yesterday?
It just came out Friday.
I'm gonna put that in the episode description.
It's heavy. And it's a long article, but it is worth the read.
It definitely explains a lot of the history and sort of where Meehan came from. What we know, and talks a lot about that 60 Minutes episode that you mentioned earlier as well. So I will put the article in the show description.
I mean, that was 4 years in the making. I mean, I can't even tell you what the emotions were I had reading that article. Daniel and I are good friends now. We text each other back and forth, and Bob actually died at the end of June. But just this community that we formed, it's so like loving and kind. And, we get people like, we had some guy who's been in the program in Charlotte for 2 months who sent me a message, a private message on Instagram that said, go fuck yourself. And I don't like you. And, you're going to ruin people's lives. And I was like, wow, why do you feel that way? And he and I ended up talking.
Right.
And I ended up being like, good for you. Cause he was like, I love it here. My life has never been better. And I was like, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that ever changes, we are here for you.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I wonder if that's how you would have felt in his position if somebody who's now in your position was speaking out against them in that way when you were freshly involved.
Well, that did happen when I was freshly involved. I mean, people have been calling it a cult for 40 years, and there was a group of people who all took off together at the same time, and they called themselves Outside.
Outside,
so great.
Very good. Yeah.
But they were like, this is a cult and this. I mean, this has come up multiple times since I was there. And I guess I would get very defensive, and I would be like, what are they? And I remember talking to one of my counselors about it. He was like, we're not a cult. We make people leave sometimes. Cults don't make people leave. And it's like, well, no, they do sometimes.
Otherwise we wouldn't know about any of them, would we?
Right.
We wouldn't know anything.
I totally get it. I totally get where that guy is, and it was that's just how we handle it. Because, from the beginning, I was like, if we're going to do this, we do not want to cause more harm to people who are currently in the group.
No.
And so that's always been our kind of like foundational, principle is everything we do, we run it through that lens, basically. Like we go, is this going to harm people who are currently there? Parents included, because parents get brainwashed just as much as the kids do.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of residual guilt that the parents feel because they had absolutely no idea where they were sending their children.
My mom does. My mom feels horrible.
And for you to come out of this program and then have those conversations with her about things that happened. And she says, but that's what I was told was the best thing for you at the time. Yep. I've spoken a lot about the guilt parents must feel in the other Troubled Teen episodes. And
it's unbelievable.
It's interesting though, because some of the parents will take accountability and some of them will say, well, I didn't know. And then, and that's that. I have to let my mom off the hook all the time. I have to be like, Mom, you didn't know. I was struggling and you wanted to help me, and that's all there is to it. Yeah, definitely. So what is the name of your nonprofit?
It's Enthusiastic Sobriety Abuse Alliance.
That sounds pretty fancy, doesn't it?
We are an alliance.
I definitely. And I often get tagged by the Instagram page in different posts and documents and stuff that are being sent around and stuff. So that's always really helpful. And what's the name of the podcast?
It's called The Group Chat. It's on, well, we're on Instagram as the.group.chad chat, not Chad, chat.pod. We are getting ready to change the name of the podcast because the group chat is actually trademarked. And there's like 8 million podcasts called the group chat. We thought we were so clever. And it is very clever because people call it the group, you know, so it was the group chat. But we are changing the name. We're going to announce that in our next podcast. So. Okay.
But I'll put a link to the podcast in the episode description. And then when you've changed the name, we can give that a little update.
Yeah, it'll probably be the same link. Just the name will change because on Instagram, you can change your username.
Yeah.
So yeah, and our link tree is like chock full of resources and has everything you could possibly find about us. Our website is enthusiasticsobrietyabuse.com. That's on there. The mass complaint form. If you are involved in enthusiastic sobriety abuse programs, you can go fill it out, and it's trauma informed. So it's really easy to complete. It's check boxes. And there are definitely places where you can write longer responses if you want to, but it's meant to not re-traumatize people. And the data we're getting from that, we're taking to media outlets, ethics boards. We're going to help people write ethics complaints, and we're going to submit them kind of en masse. And we're just going to keep doing whatever we can do. Yeah,
that sounds absolutely incredible. Yeah. And is the Facebook group a place that people can come by if they have been a victim of one of these programs?
Yeah, so it's private for, obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you do have to friend somebody who is already in it in order to have them invite you. So, people can friend me. I'm Jacqueline Sazzy Liebler on Facebook. They can friend Liz. She's Liz Nickerson. And we'll add them to the group.
Fantastic. Yeah. And one more thing I just wanted to mention before we wrap up our discussion today, which has gone over a nice lengthy hour over what we thought it was going to.
I know.
Is that a lot of the work that you are doing will come from the perspective of somebody who has a later in life diagnosis as well of autism, and you've mentioned your other diagnosis of bipolar. So there is potential here for people who may also have a diagnosis of their own to understand that you can take back some power in your life. You can become a part of this kind of whistleblowing and activism, and your life doesn't have to be a diagnosis. You don't have to be defined by your diagnosis or your experiences. You've gone through all these traumatic things emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually. You've gone through all these experiences, and you're here talking about how we can change and how we can do better and how we can improve things for other people so that they don't have to go through these experiences. And I think it's so empowering for people to be able to come and listen to your story and know that you may have a diagnosis. It may be a diagnosis of alcoholism. It may not be. It may be a false diagnosis of alcoholism, like you've spoken about today. Yeah. But you can come out of the other side of these experiences, and you can do better for yourself. You can do better for other people. And there is support out there. You've just listed a whole plethora of things that are available. Specifically for people that have been in these ES programs. But for all of the resources that there are for ES survivors and victims, there are the same amount of resources for people coming out of other coercive control groups. So I just think it's so impressive and commendable, the work that you're doing to try and change the lives of people that could be affected or have been affected by these programs. And hopefully we'll keep an eye on things and kind of keep an ear to the ground, and we'll see some change. You know, the Breaking Code Silence movement seems to be making some waves, and you know, people are coming forward and talking about their experiences, and there is being legislation spoken about in some states, and there is some change coming around. And from what you've said, you know, the data gathering that you're doing is only going to bolster that and add to it. So I think
Paris Hilton being involved doesn't hurt.
No, absolutely no. If you can get like high profile people like that, not only does it bring sort of the financial and media side of things, it also brings a whole host of and demographic of people that might not have ever been interested in this type of thing, to make themselves aware of potential dangers that they could be involved in. You know, to come forward and be like, I'm a fan of Paris Hilton. What's this documentary she's made? Oh my goodness, I had no idea
her documentary is so good.
It's just bringing it to a whole new group of people who might be interested in fashion or DJing or makeup or fame, but never thought that a person like Paris Hilton could have been subjected to this type of thing, and she absolutely has been. So there's so many advocates on board. There's some incredible memoirs being released. The Breaking Code Silence people are really good at highlighting. So I'll make sure that I put all those social media links to all of the stuff that you're doing, the articles and things in the episode description, so people can go and do a bit more research if they want to. And all that there is left to say is thank you so much for your time, Jacqueline, and for everything that you're doing to make positive change.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your time too. This is really, you know, we're just interested in getting the word out any way we can, you know, and I'm just really, really grateful for all of you that have kind of reached out and said, you know, how can we help? Because you're helping too, you know. I can't even tell you how many people we've heard from because they've heard us on a podcast. So thank you for your time as well, and thank you for being a part of this movement.
Absolutely. It's an absolute privilege. So I'll say goodbye and I'll speak to you soon, Jacqueline. Take care and have a great day.
Thanks, Casey. You too. Bye-bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. To get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.